August 23rd, 1305. London stirs to life under a sky heavy with anticipation. Today, the city will bear witness to a death so brutal, so unforgettable, that its echoes will linger through the ages. The crowd thickens by the hour. Merchants abandon their stalls. Nobles descend from high towers. From every alley and district, people flow in not for bread, not for ale, but for blood. They have come to watch a man die. In the distance, sounds emerge. The rasp of wooden wheels grinding against stone. The steady rhythm of hooves on cobblestone. And something else, something worse. A dragging sound. A wet, sickening scrape. Flesh against stone. A crimson trail smeared across the street, like breadcrumbs for the ravens. The crowd shifts, parting like a rotting tide. At its center, tied naked to a wooden frame and dragged by a horse, is a man. His name is William Wallace. Once he was the voice of a dream of a free Scotland. Now he is little more than blood and bone, a symbol of resistance being hauled to his end. His body is a testament to punishment. Every mile from the northern border to this brutal stage has etched its fury onto his flesh. His skin is torn in ribbons. His back resembles a bloodied board, marked square by square with wounds. Yet still, somehow, his eyes burn. Even now, even here, surrounded by jeers and filth hurled by strangers, William Wallace does not yield. Before we delve deeper into this forgotten tale of rebellion and ruin, if stories like this move you, if you find value in the shadowed corners of history, consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. Let us know where you're listening from. It's a remarkable thing how these stories unite us across continents and centuries, drawn together by shared wonder and memory. But to truly understand the nightmare that awaits Wallace in these final moments, we must turn back the clock 35 years to a Scotland still untouched by war. The year is 1270. In the soft, rolling hills of Renfrewshire, a child is born to Sir Malcolm Wallace, a minor landowner whose hopes are simple: to till his land, serve his lord, and live in peace. The child is named William. No one suspects that this boy will grow into a man who will shake the foundations of empires and provoke the wrath of a king. Young William Wallace grows tall beneath the long shadows of the Scottish Highlands. Unlike many of his peers, he learns to read and write. He studies Latin with monks, absorbing the words of ancient minds. His intellect is keen, his thinking precise, but it's not only his mind that turns heads. By the time he reaches 20, William Wallace is already a legend in flesh. Towering at nearly 6.5 feet, with shoulders built like the gates of a fortress and hands strong enough to wield a 6-foot claymore, he becomes the kind of man whispered about around hearth fires. A man who might one day carry more than just a sword, perhaps the hopes of a broken nation. At this time, Scotland is not yet broken. It is peaceful. King Alexander III rules with a calm and capable hand. The markets bustle. The harvests are good. Children sleep safely through the night. There is laughter in the fields and prayers of gratitude in the chapels. But peace is delicate far more than anyone dares admit. In 1286, on a storm-lashed night more suited to myth than memory, Alexander III rides out along the cliffs near Kinghorn. He never returns. His body is found broken below the rocks. With his death, the golden years collapse like rotted timber. The throne passes to Margaret, the Maid of Norway, his granddaughter. She is just 3 years old, and she has never touched Scottish soil. For 4 uneasy years, Scotland is ruled by regents in her name. Whispers of treachery grow louder. Then, in 1290, on her voyage to Scotland, the child queen dies. Scotland is left leaderless. No king, no queen, no clear future. Just a nervous silence, and the sound of swords being sharpened in the shadows. And then comes a man whose name will change everything. Edward Longshanks. Edward I of England. He is a tall man 6 feet 2 inches, when most men barely clear 5.5, but his height is the least of his power. He is a seasoned warrior king, fresh from crushing Wales beneath his banner. Now his gaze turns north. Desperate to avoid civil war, the Scottish nobles make a fatal error. They invite Edward to settle the dispute between the many claimants to the vacant throne. They do not know that they are inviting a wolf into a house of sheep. Edward chooses John Balliol, a man, soft in will and easier to bend. A man he believes he can command like a pawn. But Edward is not content with placing a puppet on a throne. He demands more. He insists that Scottish nobles swear fealty directly to him. He forces Scottish legal disputes to be tried in English courts. He orders Scottish knights to fight in his foreign wars. Every decree is another thread pulling tighter around Scotland's throat. By 1296, even the submissive Balliol begins to resist. He rejects Edward's overlordship. He forges an alliance with France. He tries perhaps too late to restore Scottish independence. Edward answers not with words, but with fire. His armies march north like a plague. The first to fall is Berwick upon Tweed. What happens there is not war. It is slaughter. The sack of Berwick is absolute. The English soldiers do not just defeat the defenders, they erase them. They hunt the living, sparing no one. Not the elderly, not the mothers, not the babes still nursing. The memory of Berwick burns itself into the Scottish soul. A massacre that does not need to be retold in words, for the land itself remembers. The rivers ran red, and the silence afterward was deeper than death. And somewhere, far from the flames, William Wallace watches and remembers. All fall beneath English steel. The chroniclers write of rivers turned crimson, of corpses piled like winter firewood, of a silence so profound that even the ravens forget to sing. 17,000 souls die in a single day, not for crime, not for treason, only for the misfortune of being born on the wrong side of an invisible line. This is the Scotland that raises William Wallace, a land of ash and agony, a crucible where blood tempers resolve and grief hammers it into steel. When Edward strips King Balliol of his crown, forces him to kneel in nothing but underclothes before a sneering court, robs him of not just jewels but dignity, young William watches, quiet, still, learning. When the great Scottish nobles bow before their conqueror and sign the Ragman roll, pledging allegiance to a foreign king, Wallace does not follow. His jaw clenches. His knuckles whiten. He remembers. When English clerks begin dividing Scotland's lands, like spoils of war, gifting them to London as friends, to nameless knights who sneer at Highland speech and spit on lowland laws, something inside the tall boy from Renfrewshire breaks. The rebellion does not begin with drums or declarations. It begins in May of 1297. And, like so many great fires in history, it starts with a single personal spark. The details are blurred by time and legend. Some say it was the murder of his beloved Marion Braidfute by English hands, a grief no man could bear. Others believe it was the 1,000th insult, the final wound to a soul already torn by too much watching and too little action. But one thing is certain. When William Wallace draws his sword against William, Heselrigg, the English appointed sheriff of Lanark, he crosses a threshold from which there is no return. The killing sends a thunderclap across occupied Scotland. Whispers fill the taverns and echo through the glens. Someone has struck back. A man has spilled English blood. And more than that, he has lived to tell the tale. Across the hills and hollows, men begin to vanish from their fields. Young apprentices leave their tools on benches. Shepherds abandon their flocks. Blacksmiths, bakers, sons and fathers disappear into the woods to join him. But William Wallace is no common rebel. He is not a bandit, nor a madman with a sword. He is something rarer. He is a visionary. He possesses the fire to burn injustice down, but also the mind to shape the flame. A tactician, a speaker, a symbol. His voice, when he speaks to the gathered, carries the echo of prophecy. "We fight not for glory nor for gold," he tells them, "but for freedom, and no good man surrenders freedom but with his life." And they listen, not because he is noble, but because he is true. The autumn of 1297 brings William Wallace face to face with the full might of English power at Stirling Bridge. The odds are grim. Perhaps 6,000 Scots against more than 15,000 English troops, including some of the finest heavy cavalry in Europe. The English commanders John de Warenne and Hugh Cressingham are so certain of victory that they barely consider the encounter a battle. They treat it like a drill, a mere flexing of imperial muscle. From the far side of the River Forth, they watch smugly as Wallace and his co-commander, Andrew Moray, position their forces on the rocky heights of Abbey Craig. What follows defies every page of every military textbook of the age. Wallace waits. Like a spider above a web, he lets the English cross the narrow bridge below. It is little more than a wooden thread stretched across the river. The crossing is slow, agonizingly so horses, infantry, supply wagons, all funneling into a long, vulnerable column. Any conventional general would have struck at once. But Wallace is not conventional. He understands what his enemies do not. Timing is everything. And so he waits, until exactly half the English army has crossed, just enough to feel confident, but not enough to reinforce. Then he gives the signal. The Scots erupt from the heights like a storm breaking over the sea. Their war cries roll down the slope and crash into the English like thunder. The English troops, caught in the middle of the crossing, are trapped split in two by the river they thought was behind them. The bridge becomes a choke point of chaos. Soldiers trample their comrades in panic. Cavalry crash into infantry. Commanders scream orders that cannot be heard. The air fills with the sound of steel, screams, and the final terror of men who realize they cannot run. Hugh Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, infamous for his cruelty and gluttony, is cut down early. The Scots, burning with fury over years of occupation, flay his corpse. They fashion his skin into belts and sword scabbards, not out of madness, but as a message, a grotesque symbol of rage turned into defiance. By the end of the day, the so-called invincible English army is shattered, and William Wallace, once a fugitive with a sword, is now a name spoken in awe. The victory at Stirling Bridge changes everything. Wallace is no longer just a rebel. He is appointed guardian of Scotland, the kingdom's de facto ruler, in the name of the imprisoned King John Balliol. For a brief, shining moment, it seems as though David has truly slain Goliath. Wallace does not stop to bask in glory. He leads daring raids into northern England, bringing fire and fury to the lands that had once sent armies to plunder his own. Towns burn. Panic spreads. English civilians flee before the oncoming Scots. Farms are torched. Forts are abandoned. The violence that once fell upon Scotland now returns carried by Scottish hands, under Scottish banners. It is revenge, but also it is warning that Scotland has teeth, and William Wallace is no longer a name. He is a force. The psychological impact is profound. If William Wallace, armed with little more than will and wit, can defeat England's finest, then what other impossibilities might come to pass? What thrones might tremble? What empires might fall? But Edward Longshanks is no ordinary adversary. This is the man who bent Wales to his will, who earned his sword hand on the bloody sands of the Holy Land, who has spent his entire life sharpening power like a blade. And Edward does not forgive humiliation. He halts his campaigns in France. He summons his most seasoned knights. And he begins forging an army with a single purpose: the utter destruction of William Wallace. The reckoning comes at Falkirk on July 22, 1298. This time, Edward takes no chances. He has studied Wallace learned from Stirling Bridge, dissected his tactics. And now he brings overwhelming force, a professional army, heavily armored cavalry, and a secret weapon that will prove decisive Welsh longbowmen. Wallace, for all his brilliance, cannot conjure miracles. His army is brave, but raw. Spearmen, farmers, young boys with barely a week's training. They stand shoulder to shoulder in formations called schiltron's bristling circles of pikes, like hedgehogs of iron, designed to repel cavalry. And at first, they work. The English horsemen charge and are thrown back. Again and again. The schiltrons hold unmoving, resolute. But Wallace knows what's coming. He has no answer for what comes next. From behind the cavalry, the Welsh archers step forward. They draw their longbows tall as a man, made of yew, deadly at over 200 yards. And they unleash hell. Thousands of arrows rain down with terrifying precision. Steel-tipped shafts punch through mail and bone, driving into tightly packed Scottish ranks. Men scream. Men fall. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The schiltrons begin to buckle. Then they break, and the dam bursts. English cavalry pours in like floodwater, slicing through the chaos. What was once a formation becomes a slaughterhouse. John de Graham, Wallace's dearest friend and most trusted lieutenant, fights to the bitter end. He is found with dozens of wounds, still facing the enemy, sword in hand. The Scottish army dissolves. The fields of Falkirk are littered with the dead thousands of dreams cut down before they could bloom. Wallace survives, but only just. His vision of a free Scotland lies shattered behind him, buried beneath hooves and arrows and grief. Falkirk marks the beginning of Wallace's darkest chapter. He is no longer a hero parading through victory. He is a hunted man, a ghost in the glens, a symbol that will either fade or rise again. Forced to resign as guardian of Scotland, abandoned by nobles who now see him not as a savior, but as a liability, William Wallace becomes a man without a country. Some accounts say he flees to France, seeking aid from Philip IV, offering loyalty in return for support against the English. Others place him in Rome, pleading Scotland's case before Pope Boniface VIII, asking not for power but recognition, legitimacy, justice. What we know for certain is that William Wallace vanishes. He becomes a ghost, a name whispered in taverns, a shadow cast long over the land, but never seen. Years pass. New names rise. Robert the Bruce, once an English ally, begins carving his own bloody path to Scotland's crown. John Comyn, Wallace's old rival, chooses a different route, making quiet peace with the occupiers. The Scottish nobility, ever pragmatic, adjusts to the reality of English rule. Their loyalty is not to kings or country, but to whatever power keeps their lands intact. But Edward Longshanks does not forget. He cannot, not while the man who humiliated him at Stirling Bridge still draws breath. Somewhere out there in the forests and the hills, William Wallace survives, and until that man is dead, England's conquest remains incomplete. The end comes not in glorious battle, but in betrayal. It is August 1305. A Scottish knight named John Menteith, his honor long since sold for English coin, lures Wallace into a trap near Glasgow. Perhaps he promises weapons. Perhaps he whispers of rebellion. Perhaps, for just one flicker of a moment, he makes Wallace believe that Scotland might rise again. It is enough. The giant walks into the jaws of fate. When the English soldiers spring their trap, Wallace reaches for his sword. He does not beg. He does not yield. But he is alone, outnumbered, exhausted. The years have taken their toll. His body, once a storm on the battlefield, is now weary and worn. They bind him in chains, not as a warrior, but as a trophy, a beast to be paraded before a jeering crowd. And so begins his final journey, not to freedom, not to victory, but to London, to the very heart of the empire that despises him. The road is long, and every stop is an opportunity for humiliation. In town after town, they display him, not as a man, but as a message, a warning. Look what becomes of those who dare defy the crown. But even in chains, Wallace refuses to bow his head. Children throw stones at his cage. Adults hurl filth and curses. And mile by mile, William Wallace is carried not toward mercy, but toward calculated agony. He is no longer a warrior. He is a warning. And Edward Longshanks does not want silence. He wants spectacle. He wants memory. A simple hanging would never suffice. Not for the man who made kings tremble. Not for the ghost who still haunts his sleep. Edward demands a lesson written in blood, etched into bone. Westminster Hall, the heart of English law. A cathedral not of faith, but of power. Its beams stretch nearly 100 feet above. Its stone walls whisper the triumphs of conquerors. And in its center stands a man in chains, unbowed, William Wallace. The charges are read. Treason, though he never swore allegiance to Edward. Murder and theft, though the men he killed wore English mail, and the coin he took funded a nation's cry for freedom. Sacrilege for daring to defy the will of a foreign king. It is theater, a performance. But Wallace, as always, plays his part to perfection. When asked to answer, he speaks not in apology, but with the fire of truth. I cannot be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. I owe him no allegiance. He is not my king. The words do not save him. They were never meant to, but they echo, and echo, and echo. The sentence is passed, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. The most excruciating death English law can devise, reserved only for traitors and only for men. The law itself declares it too monstrous for a woman to endure. It is not simply death, it is obliteration, a destruction of the body so complete that the man becomes unrecognizable, and the soul, it is hoped, is too broken to rise again. But William Wallace is not broken. Not yet. The morning of August 23rd, 1305, breaks under a gray and heavy sky. London thrums with anticipation. For days, the city has buzzed with gossip and grim excitement. Street vendors peddle meat pies and mugs of ale to the growing crowd. Nobles jostle to secure the best vantage points. Children, absent from their lessons, wriggle toward the front lines for a glimpse of the infamous prisoner. There is something sickly in the air, a hunger, a bloodlust, thick enough to taste. At Westminster Hall, William Wallace is stripped bare and tied to a wooden hurdle, a low, rough sledge meant for dragging loads across fields. The symbolism is cold and intentional. He is no longer treated as a man, but as an object. A length of rope is knotted around his ankles, the other end fixed to a horse's harness. When the beast lurches forward, Wallace begins his final, brutal passage through the streets of London. Each cobblestone becomes a weapon. His skin, already weakened from months of imprisonment, tears open against the stones. His head bounces violently with every jolt, blood pouring from countless wounds, painting a trail behind him a trail. The street dogs are quick to follow. The crowd swells behind like a twisted parade, their voices rising in a chorus of jeers and curses, blending with the sickening scrape of raw flesh on stone. The procession winds slowly through the narrow streets, past St. Paul's Cathedral, where priests cross themselves and avert their gaze, past the market squares, where even the merchants abandon their stalls to join the swelling mob, past the homes of the privileged, whose occupants stare down from their windows, torn between horror and intrigue. Wallace drifts in and out of consciousness. His body is a canvas of torment, yet his lips still move whispers of prayer or defiance. Finally, they arrive at Smithfield, the city's execution ground. A vast, open space known as the Elms, shaded by the trees that dot its boundary. Over the years, it has soaked up the blood of many, but never like this. At its center, A rough wooden platform stands surrounded by fences, meant to keep the swelling crowd at bay. And on that stage of suffering, London will witness the final act of a man who refused to kneel. Ropes and pulleys dangle from a wooden scaffold, swaying like the rigging of some infernal ship. Nearby, braziers blaze with heat, their flames flickering in hungry anticipation. The executioner stands ready beside his instruments, not a butcher, but a craftsman. He has been selected for his ability to prolong life, not to end it swiftly. His task is not merely to kill William Wallace. It is to choreograph a spectacle of pain that will echo through time, a warning etched into memory. The first act begins, the hanging. Wallace, barely clinging to consciousness after the brutal procession through the city, is hoisted upright and dragged beneath the gallows. A thick hemp rope, rough and coarse, as wide as a man's thumb, is secured around his neck with mechanical efficiency. The crowd hushes. Their bloodlust holds its breath, not from compassion, but anticipation. This is no quick death. There will be no sharp drop to snap the neck and bring peace. Instead, Wallace is slowly lifted into the air, just high enough for his feet to dangle above the dirt. The rope coils around his throat like a serpent, squeezing tighter with every second. His legs kick helplessly. His body bucks and shudders, searching for air that refuses to come. His face darkens, from red to purple, from purple to blue, his eyes bulging grotesquely as the pressure builds behind them. Some in the crowd cheer every twitch. Others wager aloud how long he'll survive. Fathers hoist children onto their shoulders for a better view, and the little ones laugh, pointing at the dancing man. Time drags on, agonizing endless moments where Wallace floats just shy of death. His brain begins to fail, starved of oxygen. But his heart, stubborn and defiant, keeps beating. Just as unconsciousness creeps in, the executioner signals. The rope is slackened. Wallace crashes back to the platform, choking on the rush of air that floods his lungs. His body spasms violently, his chest rising and falling like a blacksmith's bellows. There will be no reprieve, no release into the peace of death. This was only the beginning. The worst remains. The second phase begins while Wallace still gasps for air, the drawing, the slow surgical disembowelment. Blades flash in the pale morning light as the executioner steps forward, his knife glinting like ice. With calculated precision, he makes his first incision, slicing beneath Wallace's ribs and down through the soft tissues of his abdomen. The wound opens wide from sternum to pelvis as dark arterial blood spills across the wooden platform, pooling in steaming crimson puddles that smoke in the cold air. Wallace's eyes fly open. The pain pierces the fog of near unconsciousness like a lightning strike. He tries to scream, but his crushed windpipe can produce only a ragged wheeze. His body thrashes against the restraints, muscles spasming in instinctive protest. The executioner is undeterred. He works with calm detachment, like a surgeon at an unholy operating table. His hands disappear inside Wallace's open torso. A moment later, the stomach is drawn out gray and glistening, curling like a snake in the morning chill. Then come the intestines, foot after foot, glistening coils tug gently from the body of a man still, impossibly, alive. Each organ is held aloft like a prize, then flung onto the open flames. The crowd erupts in wild cheers. The scent of burning flesh rises, heavy and choking, mingling with the sharp tang of blood and the oily smoke from the brazier. Many spectators cover their noses with cloth, but not one of them turns away. They are witnessing a spectacle, something greater than punishment. This is a performance of absolute power. A man being reduced, methodically, to parts. And yet Wallace endures. But the agony is not yet complete. There is one final cruelty, castration. The blade flashes once more. In one swift, brutal motion, Wallace's manhood is severed. The crowd surges, shrieking with glee, as the mutilated flesh is held high like a grotesque banner before being tossed into the flames. The symbolism is deliberate, unmistakable. This is not just a death, it is an erasure. A warning to every would-be rebel. This is the cost of defiance. And somehow, unspeakably, Wallace remains alive. A hollowed husk of what once was. His chest still rises and falls. Each breath a miracle. Each heartbeat a final act of resistance. His eyes, though veiled by pain and dimmed by the shadow of death, still hold that ember of defiance, the same fire that carried him through years of war and loss. Even now, as life slips from him drop by drop, William Wallace does not yield. His body is ruined, but his spirit remains unbroken. The final act, the quartering, must wait until death finishes what cruelty began. And when it comes, it is not submission that marks his end, but something that almost resembles victory. His lips move one last time, forming silent words no one else can hear. A prayer? A final curse? Or simply the name of the land he loved beyond life, Scotland? Then, at last, the great heart stops. The executioner steps forward to conclude the sentence. With cold efficiency, axes rise and fall, their strikes wet and heavy. One by one, Wallace's limbs are severed from his broken body. The head, once raised proudly and never bowed in submission, is taken with a single stroke, then held high above the hushed crowd. Sated by the carnage, the spectators begin to drift away. But Wallace's fate does not end with death. His head, blackened with tar to slow decay, is mounted on a spike atop London Bridge, the first to ever grace its infamous parapets. His limbs are sent north, dispatched like grim messengers to the four corners of his homeland, to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Each serves as a warning. A silent decree from Edward Longshanks to all who might dream of resistance. This is what defiance earns. To the king, it is the final triumph. The rebel has been annihilated, body destroyed, legacy erased, future silenced. Surely no one would follow where Wallace led. Surely no spirit could withstand such horror. But tyrants often fail to grasp the paradox of martyrdom. The death of a man may bury his bones, but it can also awaken something deeper, an idea, a fury, a cause too large to kill. Even as Wallace's remains rot upon their spikes, something begins to stir in the soul of Scotland. The violence meant to break a nation instead ignites it. Within months, Robert the Bruce, once hesitant, even complicit, slays his rival John Comyn in a chapel and claims the crown of Scotland. The wars for independence, far from ending with Wallace's death, erupt into a new and even bloodier chapter. The king had scattered Wallace's body to silence him, but his memory, terrible, sacred, and eternal, had already taken root. At Loudon Hill, at Bannockburn, and on countless other fields, Scottish warriors charge into battle with one name on their lips, Wallace. Not just a man now, but a war cry, a symbol. His name becomes thunder, carried on the wind, and with it comes dread. English soldiers flinch at its sound. Their hearts remember what history has tried to bury. Edward Longshanks, the king who condemned Wallace to die, will never see Scotland tamed. He dies in 1307, just 2 years after Wallace's execution. On his deathbed, he is said to have commanded that his bones be boiled clean and borne at the head of every English army until Scotland is broken. But his son, Edward II, is no hammer of nations. He is soft where his father was steel. Under his ineffective rule, the English hold on Scotland weakens until it shatters entirely. And then, in 1320, the final irony is inked into parchment. A gathering of Scottish nobles signed the Declaration of Arbroath, a document that stands, even now, as one of the greatest expressions of national liberty ever written. Its words, steeped in the same spirit Wallace carried to his grave, still echo through the ages. As long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. William Wallace never lived to see this moment. He never stood in a free Scotland, but he planted the seed that would grow into it. His death, intended as a grim lesson in obedience, became instead the spark that lit a revolution. Edward wanted Wallace erased from memory. Instead, he made him eternal. And that is Wallace's true victory. The man who died in agony at Smithfield, his body destroyed, scattered to the winds, achieved through death what he could not secure in life. He transcended the battlefield, becoming something no sword could touch, a legend. Not a legend of kings or castles, but of something simpler, fiercer, the right of a people to live free, to kneel only to their own conscience, to call their land their own. More than 7 centuries have passed since that gray morning in London, and still the name William Wallace stirs the blood. Still, his story is told again and again, each generation drawing strength from his sacrifice. His body is gone, long returned to dust, but his spirit endures in every struggle for freedom, in every voice that dares to rise against tyranny, in every heart that refuses to bow. But the idea he died for, that freedom is worth any sacrifice, that some principles are worth dying for still, burns as brightly as ever. Standing in modern-day Smithfield, watching the traffic roll past the quiet memorial that marks the place where Wallace met his end, one cannot help but wonder, what would he think of his legacy? Would he take pride in knowing that his death ignited the revolution he died trying to begin? Would he be astonished that his name, after more than 7 centuries, is still spoken with reverence in the land he cherished above all else? Perhaps the answer lies not in guesswork, but in the simple, undeniable truth. We still remember him. In an age where fame flickers and fades, where heroes are made and forgotten in the span of a headline, William Wallace endures. His story continues to inspire those who face impossible odds, those who stand alone against overwhelming power, those who refuse to compromise their convictions, even when the price is everything they hold dear. His brutal execution was meant to be an ending. The final page in the story of a rebel king refused to kneel. Instead, it was the prologue to a legend that would outlive thrones and empires, a testament to the human spirit's power to triumph, even in defeat. By dying as he lived, unbroken, unbowed, defiant, William Wallace achieved the only victory that truly matters. He became immortal, and so, the spirit of that tall man from Renfrew still walks among us, in every act of courage against impossible odds, in every refusal to bow to unjust authority, in every stand taken for what is right, even when it comes at great cost. The body they quartered and scattered has long returned to the earth, but the dream he died for, the dream of freedom, burns eternal.